Until cameras up. Cameras are up, but they're not lit, are they?
I think they are up. Yeah, we're good.
Good to go, Chair.
Many thanks. Okay. Welcome, members and everyone, to the 56th meeting of the Committee for Finance in the 2022-27 mandate, and this is the first in our new session, so welcome back everyone after their break, and I hope everyone had a decent summer, including our regular viewers who are watching online. Members and indeed that one regular viewer who's watching, God love them. The committee meeting will be broadcast online throughout Parliament buildings. As always, put your phone on silent or airplane mode. Agenda item 1 is apologies. We don't have any apologies. I think we have 1 or 2 members joining us.
Dennis will be late, Chair.
1 or 2 members will be late. We are starting early to deal with outstanding business. Deirdre's online. Yes, and we have 1 member who may. Okay, that's fine.
Matthew, sorry, apologies, Chair. I have a hard stop at 1700, so
no problem. That's fine, Steve. Yeah.
All hoping for.
Thank you, Dr. Rick, and hopefully we will get through business relatively promptly. So what I'll be trying to do, and of course we have a member who is celebrating a birthday, but it's an impressively young birthday, so there's no reason to be worried about that. Agenda item 2, declaration of interest. Does any member have any relevant interest to declare? No. Okay. 3 is chairperson's business. The first item of chairperson's business relates to annual reports and accounts. The Deputy Chair had previously requested details of which departments and ALBs had submitted their annual reports and accounts prior to the summer recess. An email from the Assembly Business Office indicates all of those which were received on or before 4th of July. I should have said this is page 6 of the meeting pack. If anybody, the Deputy Chair, wishes to come in or anybody's happy with that.
Yeah, Chair, thank you. It's good to have the information. Obviously, statutory deadline's not until November, but pre-summer recess is a good financial management that is aimed for. So it would be good if we could check in on this, if possible, later in September and October, just to see how all the departments are doing.
Yeah, I think we can do it, and hopefully that our prompting will ensure good practice. Thank you. 3.2 is the Insolvency Bill. Call for evidence.
Chair, just
go ahead. Yeah.
I don't know how germane it will be, but everybody will notice the Chancellor's statement today that if departments are not made all the savings they need to, they needn't bother going asking for any money out of the £9 billion reserve. Just might be interesting with the reports coming through. Obviously, if we were aware of which one of our departments has actually met that remit, because obviously there's going to be some concerns about meeting things.
Okay, so I'm just crystallising. That's not specifically in relation to these annual report. I might just come back to that and crystallise that into an action. Is your suggestion that we go to the Finance Department and ask whether they have had specific correspondence? Should we ask just whether the Treasury if they have had specific correspondence about that? As
we also probably need to know which departments actually meet the remit, and sure. I don't think they do.
The department has flagged up where some reserve claims are going to be made. So it might just be useful if those go beyond DOF to get a list of that.
Right, okay.
I'm happy with that, Chair.
Okay. Right, okay. Now the next is the Insolvency Bill. Call for evidence, which is, this item is at page 10 of the pack. This bill, so the Economy Committee launches call for evidence. The bill will bring forward insolvency arrangements to bring Northern Ireland into line with England and Wales. It also includes a limited number of NI-specific measures, which relates solely to the provision of the Enforcement of Judgments Office. Members, we will submit a nil return unless any member has a specific comment they wish to raise. Okay, nil return it is. Committee for Agriculture Dilapidation Bill. Call for evidence. That's at page 15. Like the Insolvency Bill, the Agriculture Committee has launched its call for evidence on the Dilapidation Bill, which the Era Minister introduced into the Assembly before the break. The bill will confer functions on district councils in connection with the dilapidation of buildings and other land. I was going to make one small suggestion in relation to this rather than another turn, which is simply to see if the LPS is if LPS is connected, or just I suppose to ask them the question whether they are feeding ill or see any relevance to them, just so we can kind of cover that off, if that makes sense, just because of the rating issue and all we talk about in terms of vacant and derelict rates. Members are content, we'll ask that question, and subject to that we will, if they're happy after that, we'll give a nil return. Okay. Next is the 3.4, this is in the tabled pack, the Cybersecurity and Resilience Network and Informations Bill. This is at page 3 of your table pack. The Department has informed the Committee of a UK Government bill which aims to strengthen cyber defences and build the resilience of essential services, infrastructure and digital services. The legislation will alter the executive functions of the Department in its role as a designated competent authority under the Network and Information Systems Regulations 2018. It will also delegate powers to the Secretary of State. I think that's the Secretary of State, the UK Secretary of State rather than the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, and introduce various measures that will have an impact on the devolved administrations. Legislative consent proposals will be required and will be updated in due course. So this is just to alert you. We don't need to have a detailed discussion on it at this point.
No, there's been a delay, Chair. This one was meant to be coming this week, today, but it looks like it's been delayed for a further month, which just gives us time to start doing preparation.
Yeah, okay. So if members are agreed, we'll get the committee staff to start making preparations. And obviously, given the experience of the previous LCM, we want to be ahead and ready on all of that if people are content. Now, the 3.5 is something which isn't in either pack, but I had wanted to raise it given some public commentary on it, and it relates to the head of the civil service and their remuneration and how they are remunerated and how they are appraised. There has been some coverage. I don't want to get into detail of the merits or otherwise of what's been reported, but I think it has raised a couple of questions which relate specifically to the role of the head of the civil service and how appraisal or performance review is done, or indeed whether it is done. My understanding was in some form in previous iterations that the UK Cabinet Secretary had some form of appraisal process involving the Northern Ireland head of the civil service. Apparently, based on the recent reporting in the Belfast Telegraph, that isn't the case. There's been some reporting on the head of the civil service moving up the pay grades based on appraisal, but no clarity on who actually conducts the appraisal. Given the public interest and I think the relative lack of scrutiny in this area, I think it is worth us, if members are agreed, but obviously I'll take people's views, asking the question about, asking a couple of questions actually. One for the either the Finance Department or the head of the Civil Services Office, given we have scrutiny over the senior civil service and civil service reform, what if any appraisal process there is for the head of the civil service. Previously it was the Cabinet Secretary. It's also worth saying the UK Cabinet Secretary has an appraisal process which involves, as I understand it, the lead non-executive director of the UK government. I'm not entirely clear what, if any, equivalent there is here. I think we should ask that question, but I'm obviously keen to hear members' views.
Chair, just for a declaration of interest, I've put in an IQW about this already and sort of asked those questions. But I think it's terms of reference, and it's also the definition of capability against competency-based payments. I think that's what is one of the key things, because particularly further down in the civil service, a lot of people are sort of thinking they're doing their job to the full extent and are getting no recognition for it. So we probably need to know what the criteria were, and I think that would be a suitable remit of the committee as part and parcel of that, Chair.
I think it would be helpful to understand essentially more detail around how the head of the civil service is, if and how they are appraised, and who does that, because the rule has changed in recent years. Obviously, some of the previous functions have been taken out of that role, so I think it would be helpful to understand, and if they could give us a clarity on how and if that has changed over time, I think that would be helpful. Do any other members? I don't know if anyone.
Just a further one, Chair, is the rest of it. I mean, I'm just thinking certainly outside of the box here and where this is likely to go to. Is there any way we could write to our compatriots in Scotland and Wales and ask them if they...
Before we get into that, we're better just starting with this basic information, because they are in a different position. The Northern Ireland Civil Service is constitutionally separate from the UK Civil Service, which is not the case in Scotland and Wales. So I think before we do that, I think it's worth just this has been a subject of public reporting, and I think it's worth us doing scrutiny. I think it falls to this committee because we have responsibility for the civil service. So all I'm suggesting is that we ask for clarity from either the Department of Finance or the Executive Office in this instance. Members are...
In my view, it's just maybe we should ask the Department for Finance rather than contacting the head of the Civil Service Office.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I'm really
We would like Chair to minister in both cases.
Yeah.
FM and DFM, and then Minister of Finance as well.
And I should just say, I'm not making any prejudgment about this. I think this is a basic job of scrutiny for us as the Finance Committee to understand what's happening. I don't say there's no explicit or implicit criticism. It's simply our job to understand what the position is. Members are content. Okay, grand. The next item relates to the fact that there is, which brings me back to what Dr. Aiken raised, which is the UK budget, which we are now expecting. 26th of November. It's an autumn statement or autumn budget, which is going to be straying into winter, I fear. But given what we've talked about, given our useful informal meeting with the Secretary of State a few months ago that the Deputy Chair and Gemma and myself participated in, I think it would be helpful for us to put a marker down now by reaching out to the new Chief Secretary and also Secretary of State, saying we would like to be kept abreast of developments, asking them to, I presume they're not going to come and give us a briefing beforehand on the record, but I think it would be helpful to get a sense of what their position is in relation to what information they're giving to the executive and what scrutiny or what opportunity we will be provided to scrutinise and understand these things. And I think touching in specifically with the new Chief Secretary of the Treasury will be, because bluntly, we just need to get on their radar. If people are content, it's really just to touch in with them. It's not to do anything more than that at this point. If people are content. Right. Happy enough? Okay. 4 is draft minutes of the meeting on the 2nd of July 25. They're at page 57. If members are content that they are a true reflection of the proceedings of the meeting held on the 2nd of July, I will sign the minutes. Are members content?
Chair.
Yeah, happy? Grand. Okay. Agenda item 5, matters arising. I will try and get through them promptly, but obviously I don't want to curtail members if they have substantive points they wish to make. Obviously to say several of these things cover either items that you will be able to pursue in your individual capacity, should there be, should you wish to, or indeed we'll probably come back to during the course of the rest of the autumn scrutiny on various matters. A very busy autumn it is. So the Dallow first matter rising is 5.1. That is a Dallow readout extract of requests we made following the meeting on the 18th of June. That is at page 75. I won't go through it all, but just so people can see, it's the table sets out the various responses. One of which relates to the Legal Services Oversight Commissioner. Another one is about the death, stillbirths and baby loss bill, which we'll be covering anyway later on. And the other is on is correspondence in relation to the CSR. Members are content to note, and obviously any information on that people can come back to if they wish, or indeed action in their own under their own steam. Happy enough? Yeah, I'll go through them all. I'll just sort of say basically what they are. So it's the Legal Service Oversight Commissioner. We requested further information in terms of DOF liability and the correspondence with the Bar Council and the Law Society. So if members are content to note that. Death, stillbirths and baby loss bill. We previously asked the Department to provide comments on a number of issues that were highlighted. The comments have been incorporated, the clause by clause table, which, as I said, we will be discussing later in the meeting. Content to note. And in relation to we asked for correspondence from the Finance Minister in relation to Finance Minister to the Communities Minister regarding casement, and also in relation to the Growth Mission Fund and for an assessment of statistics on the real terms increase in total DEL between 23-24 and 28-29, an average real growth rate. So that was something that we raised in our evidence session. I think the Deputy Chair wishes to come in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just on the Growth Mission Fund, I wonder if we could put a marker down to look into a bit more detail on this, like finance and economy crossover. Just want to know what the plans are for this, and just to make sure that it's evenly distributed right across Northern Ireland, and a bit more information as to when this is going out, what the plans are.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, is announced obviously in the spending review, so we await, I presume there'll be more.
Yeah, so the only details that have been released, Chair, so far is that the Northern Ireland office will take this forward, so it might be useful to contact them.
Okay, we perhaps should go directly to the, it may be worth us going directly to the NIO then. Okay, Deputy Chair, we're content with that. Right, now the next agenda item relates to the 20 readout extracts.
We just need to agree to send that on to the other committees.
Yes, if people are content, we'll send it on to the committees. Yeah, people are content. Okay, we then move on to the readout from of items that came from the 25th of June meeting. That is at page 95, members. First relates to the High Court judgment in relation to the A5. The committee previously asked about the A5 High Court judgment. In their response, the department tells us that DFI officials are assessing the implications of the judgment, including compensation with farmers, and once this is complete, they will engage with the Department of Finance on to determine the extent of further reduced requirements. The reallocation of any earmarked funding will be a matter for the executive as part of both the in-year monitoring process and the budget 25-29 process. I would just say, given that they gave us that response in July, which is now 2 months ago, I presume that it'll moved on a bit by now. They should know slightly. So in the 25-26 we have 100. I'll bring it up here now. 102 million of capital funding allocated for A5. That now can't be spent, I presume. So I presume it will be in the mix for remonitoring. So I think we could get, it would be helpful to get a clarity from the department on that, Deputy Chair.
Yeah, just on that, 102.8 million earmarked for the A5 capital, and they've only reduced it by 12, so £90 million earmarked capital for 25-26, given that we're in September. I think it's definitely important to see the capability of getting that spent on a capital programme within this financial year.
Yeah, well, I think and particularly, so the reduced requirement, like as you say, takes it down to 90, but you still have then a 90 which cannot be spent after the High Court judgment. Yeah, so I think a prompt response on that would be helpful. On the rating policy update, that's 5.7. Members, as of page 98, we asked for information on the Strategic Asset Management Unit in LPS and details on how the 10-year strategic review cycle will change. I'm allowed to call the Strategic Asset Management Unit SAMU. I'm going to now because it's in front of me.
Yeah,
SAMU
that was the abbreviation we were given. So
there's a wrestler in the WWF in the 90s called SAMU. I don't think it's the same thing, but that's just anyway.
I don't think it's copyright.
No, I don't think so. It's a multidisciplinary team to provide leadership, expertise, and support to all departments and their arm's length bodies to enable them to use land and property assets effectively. It is stated, details of the work of SAMU is provided, but it will directly assist departments with surplus asset disposals, office lease approvals, the development of new data sources, and the first registration of unregistered land. It is stated that the Minister will be considering options for the delivery of the strategic review of rating supports in the autumn, alongside research findings from the 25-26 reviews from Small Business Rate Relief Scheme and the exclusions and liability policies within non-domestic ratings. The Minister will be making announcements alongside the next tranche of policy reviews to be undertaken for 26-27. Does that mean that it says the Minister will be making announcements alongside the next tranche of policy reviews? What does that, I don't really understand that. What do we think?
You maybe recall when the Minister briefed the committee, he said the 10-year cycle maybe doesn't mean 10 years, and that new information has come along, there's new data, etc. as well, and that cycle might well change.
Okay.
So I think it's just a case of reflecting that, Chair, but we'll be continually asking for updates anyway.
Okay, we will be asking for updates on rating policy in general. That's to note for, in case anybody else was to add something. Okay. The next readout response is on page 99, and that's in relation to the death, stillbirths and baby loss bill. The committee previously asked the department for a view on comments made by the Justice Committee in relation to the handling and retention of sensitive data. The department has confirmed that GRO and DRO use the NI registration office system, which is managed by GRO and IT Assist, to assure optimum functionality and robust security, safeguarding the personal data provided by informants. Departmental data protection policies are strictly adhered to in respect of all data, with appropriate restrictions in place for the handling and retention of sensitive data. This information has been added to the clause-by-clause bill table for members when we consider it later today. So that's to note. We can talk about it on the clause-by-clause if people are content. 5.9.
And if we agree, Chair, to send it on to the Justice
We send it on
Committee.
to the Justice Committee as well for the departmental response. 5.9, Dallow readout response, incorrect conversion of civil partnerships. That is at page 100 of the meeting pack. The committee had previously sought details on what support had been offered to couples whose civil partnerships had been incorrectly converted to marriages. Details of support offered and assistance given are provided, including initial contact and ongoing discussion. So in fairness, it does say the Registrar General himself, I presume that means, contacted the couples personally, and there was correspondence with an official apology. Okay, did anybody wish to say anything more about that? Okay, that's helpful that we were able to get that clarity. The June monitoring round is the readout response at 5.10. That's the page 102 of the meeting pack. That was, yes, sorry.
Chair, just on that, just when we have monitoring around there, it is flagged up with me. We haven't yet received the commissioning note for October monitoring. Now, the Minister had indicated it was happening,
Yeah.
but we've seen no commissioning note. So if members are content, we'll ask for
Yes.
an update if a commissioning note has gone out, and if so, getting a copy of that. But we're not aware of one.
Yeah. Okay. Great. That's, I mean, that was the readout response is really just around timing of the June monitoring round, but it's happened now, so it's moot. Okay, 5.11 is the response to the requests we made on the 2nd of July, and that begins at page 103. So item 5.12 is the response on the Public Sector Transformation Board. That's at page 107 of the pack. The department has indicated that the PTSB will provide advice to the Finance Minister on which projects are deemed as transformational and how they could be prioritised. The Minister will bring forward recommendations to the Executive. Hold on a second. The Executive will make final funding decisions. It is also indicated that the Chief Scientific and Technology Advisor's appointment is still part-time and anticipated to continue to be so. This is, I guess, interesting to the extent that the part-time role of the Chief Scientific and Technology Advisor, given that this is a significant chunk of their, it would be helpful to understand whether how much of Professor McCarthy's time is PSTB, or whether this is just an additional thing she is asked to do when she to squeeze into the 2.5 days a week. We're still not entirely, I think we're still kind of slightly going around in circles in terms of how the PSTB works, but anyway, there we are. But I think we should ask about the Chief Scientific Advisors, just how much time they spend on PSTB.
Yeah,
happy with that.
Right, happy with that, Chair.
Okay. The next readout response is 5.13. That is inquiry, mother and baby institutions, Magdalen laundries and workhouses and redress bill scheme. That's at page 108 of the meeting pack. As members will recall, the Executive Office Committee asked this committee for comments to its call for evidence on the inquiry on that bill. The committee asked if the Department of Finance had any locus within on the provisions. The department has indicated that it has a locus in respect of funding provided to the designated department in relation to the administration of a redress scheme. However, the Executive Office may also direct, I presume, direct funding with the approval of DOF. The department has also been asked to approve expenditure relating to several business cases in relation to truth recovery. So we are asked to consider this response and agree an appropriate onward response. I don't think we have any. I don't think I have any particularly substantive, other than to form to say that we have engaged with the department, who have explained to us there where they have a particular locus. I don't have any other substantive comments. If members are content, that we just note the response we have had from the department and forward it to the Executive Office Committee. Right. Okay. The next is 5.14, which is the Dalla Rita response on the 24-25 provisional outturn and June monitoring round. The department has provided a comparative table of June monitoring round bids and allocations. It has also indicated that following the 88.5 million allocation in budget 24-25, DFI confirmed in-year reduced requirements totalling 23.5 million. As this funding was earmarked for the A5, it could not be reallocated to other capital projects. Finally, confirmation is given that FTC funding for Casement Park is new funding and that the remaining FTC underspend from 24-25 can be used to offset future FTC payments to the Treasury. There is no change to existing rules beyond budget exchange limits. This is to note and to forward to, go ahead, Deputy Chair. Deputy Chair first.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. And I think the layout of this, of bids against allocations, is very helpful, much more useful than the previous format. And I know that Philip Brett had raised this previously in committee. Could we suggest to the department that this could be the preferred way of circularisation? Because I think not just for this committee, for all members of the Assembly, being able to deduct what actually was bid for and what was allocated in the format previously circulated in the ministerial statement was very difficult to follow, so this would be really, really useful.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Okay, Steve Jenkins, sorry.
Chair. So that's now the definitive statement, because remember we did ask questions from the floor to the ministers about how FTC was shaped for being shaped for Casement Park, and it seemed to be a novel approach. But what they're basically saying, it's now being done strictly in accordance with normal FTC rules. So
I think what they're saying is that the amount of FTC that was tell me if this is someone can correct me, the amount of FTC granted to Casement Park in June is almost exactly the same amount as was underspent, as it were, or not allocated in 24-25. However, the department's view is not that this is effectively the same FTC from the last financial year carried forward, but rather that it is not that, because that amount can still be used to offset. So the way FTC works is that when it's underspent, the deducted amount is used to reduce from future interest payments. They're saying it will still be reduced by an equivalent amount, but there will also be a 50 million allocation in this budgetary year.
yeah, so basically using the FTC to pay down the debt.
Yeah, well, I mean, no, not quite. It's a bit more complicated. I still think it's quite a striking coincidence that they're the equivalent amounts, but it is also the case that.
What are you saying, Chair?
But it is also the case that they are saying that they're saying that the underspent amount in 24-25 can be used to offset future. That they're treating that in the same way that they treat other underspends of FTC.
That's it.
People content with that, okay? Right. 5.13 is Dalla Rita response in relation to, as I said, sorry, we've already gone through that one. And we've done both of those.
515.
515, apologies, I'm rereading things I've already done. 5.15 is Death, Stillbirths and Baby Loss Bill, another Dalla Rita response, that's at page 115. The department has again provided a rationale for the charging provision in the bill, reiterating the same information provided in respect of multiple copies or amendments. The department also highlighted the fact that the GRO is required to be self-funding, therefore it is considered prudent to include a charging provision to allow costs to be recovered. I presume this is in a very marginal hypothetical scenario. This information has been added to the clause-by-clause table, which we'll have the opportunity to discuss later on. Okay, so we'll obviously be discussing that later. 5.16 is the Dalla Rita response on the deaths, again on death, stillbirth and baby loss bill. That is also at page 116. The department was asked for comments in relation to persons qualified to act as informants. This was an issue raised in confidence during the committee's call for evidence. The GRO recognises that the terminology used in the list of potential informants registering a death could be difficult to understand for informants registering a death, and plan to consider and carry out a full review of the list of qualified informants in future. The department was also asked for an assessment of further points raised by Armagh City, Banbridge and Craigavon Council in relation to need for clarity around clauses 3.5. That's 3 to 5, not 325. It is indicated that prior to commencement of the bill provisions, guidance will be issued to registered medical practitioners on relevant procedures and actions. So this information has been added to our clause-by-clause table, which we're going to discuss a little bit later. That's to note. 5.17 is a Dala readout response in relation to the multi-year budget 26 to 29 information gathering exercise. That's page 118. The committee asked the department to schedule an oral briefing on budget 26 to 29 on 24th September. However, officials have asked that this takes place on the 1st of October. So we were planning basically to do it in a couple of weeks' time, but the department would like to do it in a couple of weeks after that, the 1st of October, but we're talking about the forward work programme later on. So we'll note until then. 5.18 is the forward work programme itself. That's page 119. The committee requested an indicative schedule of secondary legislation and details of any items of business that the department would like the committee to consider from September to December. The DALO has provided a list of indicative business for the committee, and this is reflected in the forward work programme to be considered later in today's meeting. However, we still await an indicative schedule of schedule of secondary legislation. So that's been with the Minister since the 5th of September. So we're continuing to seek that update, and it's to note. Okay, DALO readout response on the Department of Finance annual report and accounts. That's at page 120 of the meeting pack. The committee requested copies of opinion reports and association action plans from internal audit of several departmental business units. On the 24th of July, the DALO indicated that officials were liaising with audit on a response to the committee, which would be provided before the end of July. Now, we had an informal meeting with the Permanent Secretary where we discussed this, and I hope very soon that we will have some more information for the committee. So that's to note at this point, Deputy Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And at that meeting where we were speaking to Neil Gibson, I think that it had been suggested that maybe we as a committee could invite internal audit in just to brief the committee on their plans, how their reports are decided, and sort of like the risk appetite around those. So just wanted to propose that we do take that forward and arrange in a session with internal audit.
Members are agreed?
Yeah.
Schedule.
Okay. So 520, thank you for that prompt. 520 is the readout response from the Administration and Financial Provisions Bill and Ireland Fiscal Council Bill, the Delegated Powers Memorandum and the Delegated Powers Memorandum, another Delegated Powers Memorandum from the Ireland Fiscal Council Bill. That is at page 121 and 122 of the meeting pack. The committee previously requested copies of the Delegated Powers Memorandum for the two bills. This arrived for the NI Fiscal Council Bill on the 24th of July. It can be found at page 122 of the meeting pack to be considered, which is we're considering later on today. It was sent to the Examiner of Statutory Rules as previously agreed by the committee. The ESR's advice is expected by Tuesday the 30th of September. So members, that's to note, and we are going to get oral briefings from the Examiner of Statutory Rules at an opportune or appropriate time. However, the Delegated Powers Memorandum for the Administrative and Financial Provisions Bill remains outstanding. So members, you could also note that the departmental officials will be attending this committee on the 24th of September to brief us on the principles of both bills. The next item is 5.22. That is a Department of Finance City and Growth Deals Quarterly Progress Report. That's at page 124 of the meeting pack. The department has provided the committee with the latest update in the City and Growth Deals, which was produced for SROs in the NICS, NIO and shared with the NICS board. That's at page 124. And given the interest the committee has had, it is useful to be getting these updates, and we welcome the fact that we are getting them. And obviously, it talks about things like the successful launch of Studio Ulster in June. Okay, we're content to continue. Actually, just now that we have it, one thing I think it would probably be useful for us to keep abreast of, and I know one member of the committee will certainly have probably a view on it as a deputy chair, that given that we know there have been some reports about issues that the project in the Newry Morning Down area is not going to go ahead, the gondola project, it would be helpful to be kept abreast of what that means for that funding, because this is a July 25 update, and so far as I'm aware, since then it has become clear that project isn't going ahead. So it would be helpful to be kept abreast of what is happening in that council area with that money, if anything, and whether the money is going to if there's an alternative use for it, I think the committee would be well to keep abreast of that. Okay, so item 5.23 is the Department of, it's from the Department, and it is the Kazakhstan Strategic Partnership and Cooperation Agreement and the Iraq Political Cooperation Agreement. Not necessarily what members of the Finance Committee in the Assembly thought we'd be talking about today, but nevertheless, the Department has written, it's page 128 of the meeting pack, the Department has written to the Committee to inform it that the two agreements above will be scrutinised by the Lords International Arrangements Committee, following which a statutory instrument will be laid to add these agreements to Schedule 9 of the Procurement Act. This details the international agreements the UK is party to since it left the EU. These signatories are then classed as treaty state suppliers for the purposes of the Procurement Act. This, in essence, means that a contracting authority may not, in carrying out a procurement, discriminate against a treaty state supplier. So these are obviously, that relates to matters of trade, but effectively it binds local procurers. Okay, so members, this is to note. Bring in Jerry Carr.
Yes, sorry, Chair. Did you say there's going to be a vote on this in the Assembly, sorry, or what's the details of that? And if there is, like,
no, there's not going to be a vote. We don't get. I mean, it's reserved. So effectively, I think
each government deal. And
it's a trade deal basically of sorts. It just it's an agreement between the UK government in one case with Kazakhstan, in the case with Iraq. But procurement, I don't know all the details myself, obviously. But
just like it's useful to know that generally, you know, for political reasons. But like, it's coming through us because of.
It's notified, Chair, to the committee because the Procurement Act is a UK-wide act that impacts on DOF. So, therefore, anything that feeds into that, DOF have to be mindful of. But we don't have a trade locus, so it's happening at UK government level.
So, one way of putting it is, if the Department of Finance or a public body in the north is procuring something, and a Kazakh business decides to bid for that work. That might seem quite unlikely, but they have certain protections under the locus of that agreement, so that binds us locally, even if people didn't sign it. So that's basically the way it works. Now,
it may not be insignificant, but yeah.
So there may well be concerns about some of these agreements. They're not concluded locally, so to be fair to the Department of Finance, they aren't responsible for concluding them. But
if members, like, I'm not saying necessarily through the committee, but if we want access to some of that information.
Can I just suggest that I'm happy to discuss it. It might be worth people want to go away and have a look at that and see if there's, so for example, Kazakhstan, I mean, there have been concerns about certain practices in Kazakhstan. If people want to go away and have a look at potential issues, by all means, I'm not sure that the committee is the best place in the first instance unless there's specific concerns to raise.
Well, what I was asking was, trying to, just to finish, was to say, can we request that through the officials separately as members?
Well, yeah, what is it? Yeah, you definitely can. Yeah, you can certainly go through them. And if there are specific concerns, by all means, I think we can bring them back to the committee. I just think at this stage, because we've got quite a big, chunky agenda, but I think it's worth noting that, and obviously it's worth us being aware of these things do have an impact locally, and they bind public bodies. Okay. The 5.24 is the 25-26 June outturn and forecast outturn, which is data that we are now helpfully provided with. So that's at page 130 of the meeting pack. It's for this is for June. We're getting an oral briefing, which is going to brief us on the June, July, and August data. We're going to bring in the Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered, have we any idea of when that briefing would be? It is quite urgent here. We're looking at £773 million of overcommitments here, non-ring fenced DEL, down from 1.1 billion, and we're looking into potentially very difficult October monitoring round. So that's obviously up to June. I think it's really, really important that we get a briefing very quickly on this, and some of the things included are the overcommitment on the Department of Health, which is related to £200 million for pay. So there's a lot of really significant numbers in there. So I would be very keen, as early as possible, to get an updated briefing.
Yeah, I think that's right.
That's the one where the department wants to do it on the 1st of October. We had requested earlier, but they say that in terms of data and so on, October the 1st will be more complete.
Because they'll have up to August. Presumably, I think we can just say to them that we would like that, but we'd like, if we're going to have that, so that's in 3 weeks, we would like we assume we'll have August data by that point, and we'll have a pretty complete picture of where they are and what their
So it'll cover all
pressures are.
3 months, Chair. June, July, and August. So it'll be fairly complete and fulsome.
Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. Well, we look forward to that briefing. Well, it might be fairly scary, but we'll look forward to it nevertheless. 5.25 is from the Economy Committee, and it is the Unite Hospitality Workers campaign, page 175 of the meeting. It's page 175 of the meeting pack. Following an informal meeting with Hospitality Ulster, the committee wrote to the Economy Committee to ask if that committee will be undertaking any work around the Unite Work Safe, Home Safe campaign and the abuse of hospitality workers. The committee followed up with the Economy Department, and we have been copied into the response as a matter of course. So we can forward that on to Hospitality Ulster if people are content, given we engaged with them. But I don't think we have a particular locus beyond that.
Or under the Unite group as well, or
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah,
have a contact if required.
definitely. Okay, that's a good idea. 5.26 is NI Fiscal Council. That is the NI Public Expenditure Data Bank. That's at page 180 of the meeting pack. The Fiscal Council has produced a data bank illustrating the main public spending numbers for Northern Ireland. These numbers show the NI executive the NI executive chooses to spend the money it receives. The first release of the data bank only contains outturn data for the executive departmental expenditure limit budgets, but the Council plan to expand this data bank further. Members were emailed this on 23rd of July, as the data bank is an extensive series of spreadsheets with numerous worksheets which does not merge well with the ECP system. What is the ECP system?
Electronic Committee Pack.
Electronic Committee
So
Pack.
the Electronic Committee Pack does not like spreadsheets of any kind. It's not overly fond of links either. So when we looked at this, it was the simplest option was to actually just email it to members, because the pack just was not going to cope.
I didn't just email the link, or just email it.
email the
whole
spreadsheet,
paper,
the whole
yeah.
thing. So you can go in and like it opens up all the spreadsheets and so on. It's just the pack will not do that.
Yep. Okay, that's great. Now, so that's to note, and that is particularly helpful as we're thinking about the role of the Fiscal Council and what they provide as we scrutinise the bill. 5.27 is a response from Chris Bryant, Minister of State at the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. He has written back to us following his response to Robin Swan MP regarding legislative consent on the Assembly. Minister Bryant has expressed regret that the UK Parliament has legislated and transfer matters without consent, emphasising that this was an issue of process rather than disagreement. He also confirmed the provisions of the bill will apply to Northern Ireland. The Clerk has met with the Departmental Board regarding LCMs and has written to the DALO.
That will be happening. That hasn't happened yet. I was getting carried away. That will be
Yes,
happening
okay,
tomorrow.
fair enough. I think it's there is lots going on. The Clerk team's doing a hell of a lot as we come back from the summer. I think it's worth saying that was a bit of a slight fiasco, but I think we have at least tied it up, and hopefully processes will be better. And to be fair to the relevant minister, they've acknowledged, both the local minister and the UK government minister have acknowledged that this shouldn't have happened the way it happened. So that's,
what
I
it
suppose,
did do, Chair,
helpful.
was flagged up an inconsistent understanding on the part of the UK departments about at what point we cease to have a voice. That's where the whole issue around royal assent came up, because they felt, yes, royal assent's what we're all aiming at. However, once amending processes have ended at Westminster, the ability to give or withhold consent ceases to be available to the Assembly.
Paul Freeman.
Yeah, I think this has highlighted massive failures on both sides, but more so where we're concerned about, which is here in a devolved assembly and the structures of legislative consent and how that actually works for us in a democratic society. So it sent alarm bells off in my head. I hope that lessons have been learned. It's not fair to put it or place it onto an individual or anybody, any official, but there should be practices in place, protocols in place to ensure that individuals can't fail in this respect, and that there's always somebody to check, or there's a check situation there, so that these very important issues that affect all of our people are countered in time and checked in time, and that we then can have our say as a legislative assembly. And so this is fundamental, and we've been failed, and hopefully, and I would go as far to say it cannot happen again.
I'll bring this in. Go ahead, Steve.
No, just of interest, I've talked to this through the Secretary of State and the NIO, because obviously it goes with the Windsor framework and the rest of it. The issue was the ping pong was occurring because of Article 2 compliance with ECHR, and speaking through the Speakers' Conference, one of our concerns is a lot of our legislation isn't necessarily ECHR Article 2 compliant, and there was going to be guidance given out about the convention of how we would look at these pieces of legislation. It does just like a simple oversight between sort of UKG and here, but it's not. It's because people can't get their heads around where the convention sits. So, I'm not a political point, but there is a degree of difficulty that's now being within this issue that we need to be aware of.
So there's two points there. One, there is the question. Well, there's the question about people understanding LCMs and how they work, whether in Belfast or in London.
Yeah.
I think the Clerk is engaging with the departmental board. I think it would be helpful for us to keep a locus and some kind of sense of what learnings, it's not actually a word, but it's not a noun, I think it's in fairness, but I've just used as a noun, are being taken forward as a result of this fiasco that existed with the Data Use and Access Bill, and what in terms of how how things are understood, including in Whitehall, where people had this idea that royal assent was the moment when you could basically give legislative consent up to royal assent, which is totally wrong. So I think it would be helpful for us to have if you're engaging, we can get an update from you at some point.
And just to say, this is very much on the Speaker's radar, and there's a lot of work being done there, and the Business Office has firmed up and talked to committee teams about how this can be handled and how departments can have more flexibility, but within Standing Order 42A.
Well, to that extent, then probably rather than giving us another bit of work, it's probably worth just that feeding into broader work at the Chairperson's Liaison Group or the Speaker or whomever, because we're doing plenty here. We were the canary in the coal mine on this particular bit. Then the second point is ECHR and Article 2 of the Windsor Framework, which binds, obviously, some of us we have a strong disagreement over whether that's a good idea or not.
I never disagree with you on that one.
A political disagreement over whether that's a good idea or a bad idea, but then there's a process question about how well that's understood. Again, I don't think that's one for this committee, to be perfectly honest. I think it's a legitimate subject to be discussed, clearly, about the impact of that, and it may be that it affects legislation in the future, although I'm not sure if it will affect any of the legislation we're looking at this autumn. But I think we can note that, but I'm not sure it's directly competent to this committee.
Sorry, through the Chair, not belabouring, of course, but one of the issues that is raised through the Speakers' Conference, and one is discussed, that it is, particularly everything from amendments and bills are going through amendments and the rest of it, the degree of compliance that needs to do with it as well. So actually, it's not something that's in the future; it's probably something that's now. But that's the reason I raise it, and because we have got a legislative process coming through, it may be something we may wish to consider, or at least get the guidance.
Although, fair enough. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure what guidance we need at this point where it would be relevant.
The Business Office has a very short response on this. If legislative consent is sought by a department, the simple answer should always be no. We will legislate ourselves. However, often that understanding is not what seems to be the awareness in Westminster. So we do seem to have a lot of cases, and this has come out. This issue that the committee had has almost been the straw that broke the camel's back. It's kind of opened a floodgate. Yep. But we do have a lot of instances where Whitehall departments simply aren't communicating at all. Yep. These things are coming out of the blue in a lot of instances. So that's a big part of the issue that the Speaker's looking at, is how better that can be done. Well, that's being looked at by TEO. So TEO are taking a coordinating role across the departments, and there's discussions with Whitehall.
Good. I think for now, we're happy. We can come back and discuss this if we can offer any help. But I think in terms of our own workload, it's one that we don't need to take specifically further. It's just a note. Okay. The next is 5.28. That's the credit union consultation. Committee previously wrote to the Economy Minister sharing submissions from the Irish League of Credit Unions and the Ulster Federation of Credit Unions to this committee's inquiry on banking and financial services. The Economy Minister has indicated her officials are working closely with both bodies. She's also indicated that the outcome of the consultation and plan of action will be shared with this committee, and that's helpful given our inquiry and report. That's to note. 5.29 is the Youth Assembly Administrative and Financial Provisions Bill. The Youth Assembly were asked for comments on the Administrative and Financial Provisions Bill, and they submitted a nil response. I'm disappointed that the young people were not more engaged.
They were fascinated, Chair, but they just didn't have anything specific to say.
Why I thought such an important, emotionally resonant bill would get young people excited.
It's the end of their term.
End of term, exactly, yeah. Administrative, so the 5.30 is from the Justice Committee, and it's also the Administrative Financial Provisions Bill. The Justice Committee gave us a no response, and that'll be included in the pack or in the committee report. 5.31, we are nearly at the end, is from the NI Commissioner for Children and Young People, and it's on the Financial and Administrative Provisions Bill. Their response is on page 206. They have responded to our call for evidence, indicating that whilst he is unable to respond in full, highlighting issues in relation to powers to make loans available to the higher education sector and powers for the Executive Office relating to services for the integration of refugee and asylum seekers, the undertaking of activity in response to, he is saying that these are all, he is interested in all of these, I think, so he has basically recommended that the department undertakes a screening and, if required, conduct a children's rights assessment on the relevant clauses of the bill to ascertain any impact on the children's rights that those particular clauses may have. So I think we can write to the department for comment on this and copy the correspondence to the Executive Office and the Education Committees. I presume the answer will be that it will not, unless it will still be for these departments to make, the screening will relate to the decisions these departments may make when they have the financial powers, not the actual bill itself. But we can certainly forward and give a response to the Children's Commissioner. Then we move to tabled pack 5.32, the Examiner of Statutory Rules. This is page 5 of the tabled pack. The examiners formally reported on 2 SRs which were previously considered by this committee at the last meeting before summer recess. The Whole of Government Accounts Designation of Bodies and SR 2025 and SR 25-109, the Public Service, Civil Servants and Others Pensions Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2025. The examiner has no comment to make on SR 104. However, as previously noted by the ESR at the meeting on the 2nd of July, SR 109 was laid in breach of the 21-day rule. However, the department provided the examiner with an explanation and the examiner is satisfied. So that's to note. Okay?
Right, Chair.
Okay, now we are moving out of matters arising, you'll be glad to hear, and on to agenda item 6, which is informal clause by clause consideration and initial consideration of our bill report on the deaths, stillbirths and baby loss bill. So that is at page 209 of the meeting pack. This is the 209 of the meeting pack. You have the clause by clause table which details all of the various issues raised as part of the committee's call for evidence over the last number of months. Hard copies are available for members should you wish to use them. At page 234 of the meeting pack is a response from Mid-Ulster Council which was received on the 4th of July. Members may also wish to note the comments made by the Council, including support for remote death and stillbirth registration and points made in relation to the timeliness of the MCCD transmission, that's the certificate of death transmission by doctors. The Council also questions whether a cost should be incurred for long birth certificates for stillborn babies. That's the issue that we have raised multiple times and that we mentioned earlier on. When we'll be talking about them in the clause by clause table. Page 236 of the meeting pack is the Hansard transcript of our evidence session with the funeral directors, which took place on the 2nd of July. So if members are content, we will move into closed session to undertake clause by clause, informal clause by clause deliberations on the bill. Any agreements can be reflected, any formal agreements we make can be reflected. We move into open session afterwards. In open session. So members, we're now going to undertake our formal clause by clause, having discussed in closed session our informal consideration of the death, stillbirth and baby loss bill. We will now have the opportunity to formally determine and set out our position on each of the proposed bill clauses. If required, on any of the clauses on which there is disagreement, we will divide as necessary. All decisions taken today will be final, but it is important to say that obviously they don't bind individual members in terms of how they vote or debate the actual the bill. So if the committee is not content with the clause, the committee can register its formal opposition to the question that the clause stand part of the bill. That would obviously remove the whole clause from the face of the bill. That would ensure that the clause, first of all, that would ensure that the clause in its entirety is debated at consideration stage. So, members, it is anticipated that we will hopefully conclude all formal deliberations at today's meeting and agree the bill report.
No,
Clerk?
Chair,
No,
we
we're
will
not going to
not
do that.
agree the bill report. We will bring that back next week because we are putting an additional commentary, so it's not just a clean report.
Okay, well, we've discussed a lot of the germane things in that'll be in the bill report already. Okay, so clause 1. So I'm going to put the question, which we've discussed. Obviously, clause 1 is the title of the bill. Is the committee content with clause 1 as drafted? I'm going to indicate content unless there are any dissenting voices. So the committee is content with clause 1 as drafted. Clause 2 is the power to approve electronic means. We put the question, is the committee content with clause 2 as drafted? I'm going to put the question for the record. Is the committee content? Yes, the committee is content with clause 2 as drafted. Clauses 3 to 5, we're going to seek agreement to group these clauses which cover direct transmission of certificates. Any member who has specific issues, obviously raise them as we go. Clause 3 is giving the certificate of the stillbirth directly. Clause 4 is giving certificate of cause of death directly. And clause 5 is giving the certificate of registration or written notice of death directly. I'm going to put the question, if members can indicate if they do not agree. Is the committee content with clauses 3 to 5 as drafted? Sorry, with the issue highlighted that we've discussed
Around the guidance.
Around the guidance that the Deputy Chair raised.
It's flagged that with the Department.
And that will obviously be reflected in the bill report. With that caveat, are members content with clauses 3 to 5? Okay, the committee is content with clauses 3 to 5. Clause 6 is the registration of particulars of stillbirth. So is the, I'm going to, people hopefully have that in front of them, I'm going to put the question, is the committee content with clause 6 as drafted? And no dissenting say the committee yes, so the committee is content with clause 6 as drafted. Clause 7 is the manner in which the particulars of death are required to be given. So I'm going to put the question, is the committee content with clause 7 as drafted? No dissenting voices, so yes, the committee is content with clause 7. Clause 8 is minor amendments relating to births and stillbirths. I'm going to put the question, is the committee content with clause 8 as drafted? Yes. The committee is content with clause 8 as drafted. Clause 9 is about no restriction on power to amend regulations. Is the committee content? Content. The committee is content with clause 9 as drafted. Clause 10, repeal of temporary provisions. Is the committee content with clause 10? Content? Yes. The committee is
very content. No?
Yes. Yeah. No, I think that's for the record, Mr. Fruit. Now, clause 11. I'm going to say that we have a specific caveat, which is that the committee has given its view that it does not believe there should be a charge for baby losses and baby loss certificates in principle, and that is clear, noting the department's view about the need to have a provision for a hypothetical future charging of fees, with the caveat that it would have to come back as a draft affirmative regulation to the Assembly, which would be both amendable and would require an affirmative vote by the Assembly. But the committee has stated that it does not believe in principle in charges. But with that caveat added, can I ask the question, is the committee content with clause 11? Yes. No dissenting voices, so the committee is... Jerry, do you wish to say you're not content?
I have issues I've noted before about the statement of the charge in it, but...
Subject to the caveat, and Jerry, I know that we're making clear that not content with the charges, but we're content. We have that recorded. Okay, so we will say we are content, subject to the caveat that we've noted. Okay, now.
Should we also mention about the fact that the fact that it's draft affirmative resolution procedure means that we can amend this?
I think I've said that. I think I've said that, and that will be noted. That will be in the report, and it'll be in the Hansard, and I will say it whenever we come to reflect it, that it's to reflect the fact, and just so people, any stakeholders, particularly people from Forget Me Not affected parents, understand that this does not create the power to charge. It creates a power to bring forward a future regulation which is both amendable and can be voted down. But subject to those caveats, we are content with clause 11. Okay. Clause 12 to 13, commencement and short title. So, clauses 12 to 13 deal with commencement and short title, so if anyone has any issues, they should say now. But hopefully not. Is the committee content with clauses 12 to 13? Great. The schedule. Is the committee content with the schedule as drafted? Yes. The committee is content with the schedule as drafted. Finally, the long title. So this is the end of clause by clause consideration. We now have to consider the long title of the bill, which I will read out. It is a bill to amend the law relating to the manner of notification of deaths, stillbirths and births, and the manner of giving particulars relating to them, and to make provision for the issue of certificates recognising the loss of a baby. Is the committee content with the long title of the bill? No dissent, so yes, the committee is content with the long title of the bill. We are now going to delay our consideration of the draft bill report
to next week.
Great. Okay. So we'll now. I think that does us for this section for now. Chair, yeah. Can I thank Philip, Aoife, and indeed Liz for participating? I think that's useful that we have done that scrutiny. I think it's worth putting on the record that we thank having given the officials quite a hard time in the past about the production of this bill. I think it's fair to say we appreciate the fact that this legislation has come forward and you've been fulsome in coming and giving us evidence, and we thank you for your work in delivering it, and we look forward to debating it. We see it. We'll obviously consider any we'll have a debate and any amendments that are laid we'll consider, but we thank you for your work on this, and we'll discuss the bill report next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So then go to 7, yeah. So thank you, Philip and Aoife and Liz. Okay, so now if Hansard are agreed, people are agreed, Hansard will report on this session. We are now going into some more bill scrutiny, but this is not quite pre-legislative, but it is a background briefing. Sure, of course, yeah. No problem. Thanks, Jared.
We're all right. Yeah.
Are we still Corey?
Still
Yes.
Corey, Chair.
Yeah, we're good, yeah. Okay. So we have Nathan Mulholland, who's research officer at RAISE, and Nathan is going to give us a briefing on. Welcome, Nathan is going to give us a briefing on the NI Fiscal Council bill. Hi, Nathan. How are you? Please do make an opening statement. I should just say, members, actually, this is at page 278 for the research paper that RAISE have prepared, and it is obviously one of our big priorities for this autumn. So thank you, Nathan, for providing this for us. So go ahead if you want to give us a brief overview.
Just on me right now, I just note, Chair, this was a joint piece with my colleague Rachel Keys. Unfortunately, Rachel's unavailable to attend today, so I'll be delivering this myself, but it wasn't
Well,
joint.
that's extremely collegiate of you.
Wait until we see what it says.
That's noted in Hansard. Thank you, Rachel and Nathan. Go ahead.
So the procedure is going to take you through the paper just in each section, and then try and leave us plenty of time for questions for the committee. So briefly, Section 1 provides an overview of the bill and the 9 clauses and 2 schedules. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, as the committee are already aware, and it's really just reiterating what's already in the contents of the bill as introduced. Section 2 of the paper provides background information on the conception and development of an independent fiscal institution in Northern Ireland. So looking back to January 2020, the New Decade New Approach Political Agreement committed to the establishment of an independent fiscal council by June 2020. That, however, did not happen, and instead in March 2021, the Northern Ireland Fiscal Council was established under a non-statutory basis by the Department of Finance. Terms of reference required it to prepare annual assessments of the executive revenue streams and spending proposals, and prepare a further annual report on the sustainability of the executive's public finances. The paper then considers subsequent developments that arose since the Fiscal Council was established. In 2021, the former Finance Committee published a report on the Independent Fiscal Council for Northern Ireland, in which a number of recommendations were made in relation to putting it on a statutory footing. Some of these recommendations are referenced further in section 4 of this paper, where discussions around issues that merit additional scrutiny are discussed, so we'll look at it more then. The paper highlights that the Northern Fiscal Council themselves conducted a consultation in 2021 on its output and structure, and the findings of the report were published in 2022. These were summarised under three themes. Sorry, apologies. Independence, so stakeholders wanted to be confident the Northern Ireland Fiscal Council was independent. They noted the importance of legislative guarantees around appointments, funding, rights to information, and right to publish. They also, and theme was education. Stakeholders believed that educating the public about how NI's public finances work is just as important as the publications that were specified in the terms of reference. And finally, process. Stakeholders expressed frustration with the executive's budget process, and there was further frustration with the programme for government and other strategies having not costed and linked clearly to specific budget allocations. Moving on to section 3 of the paper, this takes a looks comparatively at legislation in other jurisdictions. The bill's explanatory and financial memorandum states that the policy underlying the bill was informed by other jurisdictions' legislation. This includes the establishment of the Scottish Fiscal Commission, the Office of Budget Responsibility, and the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council. As noted in the paper, RAISE has previously compiled an in-depth report on the roles and remits of independent fiscal institutions in the UK and the Republic of Ireland. The former Finance Committee considered those comparisons when formulating its recommendations in July 21, and the committee may also wish to consider this paper in relation to the bill. Section 4 of the paper considered policy and scrutiny of the bill. The first subsection presents an overview of this committee's call for evidence, which closes on the 30th of September. Section 4.2 outlines additional issues of merit for consideration when scrutinising the bill. These relate to function, membership and staffing, access to information, and finance and funding. I would note these have been framed in the context of the 2025 OECD Principles for Independent Fiscal Institution recommendations, and also the previous Finance Committee's 2021 report. So looking at these issues individually, so for function, the 2025 OECD recommendations state the importance of independent fiscal institutions having a clear mandate, and for this to be set out in legislation. It also further states that IFIs, as they're referred to, should have the autonomy to determine their own work programme within the bounds of this mandate they've been given. They cite typical tasks carried out by independent fiscal institutions around the world, including economic and fiscal projections, analysis of executives' budget proposals, monitoring compliance, costing of major legislative proposals, and analytical studies on selected issues. The committee will note that the former Finance Committee's 2020 report recommendations on the functions of the Northern Ireland Fiscal Council when it would be set out in legislation align closely to these typical tasks as presented in the most recent OECD work. Clauses 2, 3 and 4 of the introduced bill set out duties of the Council to examine and report on the public finance in Northern Ireland. These include a budget assessment report for each financial year, a yearly fiscal sustainability report being an overall report or a thematic report, although an overall report must be produced every 5 years, and the Council can also publish such other reports as it considers appropriate. To note, the bill as introduced leaves scope for expanding the Northern Ireland Fiscal Council's remit. For example, the paper notes that the bill does not propose that the Fiscal Council should prepare, for example, its own forecasts. However, Clause 5 of the bill, as introduced, leaves scope for expanding this remit through secondary legislation at some point in the future. But doing such through secondary legislation would then diverge from the current OECD recommendations that says the mandates of IFIs should be clearly defined in higher level legislation. Looking towards membership and staffing as a secondary issue, as the next issue.
We're just saying one thing, Nathan. So,
sorry.
No, not at all. Just to come to questions, but they do specific mandate. You mentioned, for example, the OBR does economic as well as fiscal forecast. That isn't part of the remit of the Fiscal Council as of yet, and the bill doesn't provide for that. Theoretically, that could be one of the things that they may choose to do, but they don't. It doesn't, on the face of the bill, ask them to compile economic forecast.
Whereas I think from the OECD's recommendations, these should be in the actual what becomes the Act itself, rather than being done through any kind of secondary legislation. That seems.
Did the OECD? Sorry, I'll ask the question. You go through your briefing, and then I'll ask the question after.
No problem. Sorry. So membership and staff. The chair and the members of the council will be appointed by DOF. That will be done in line with the code of practice of the Commission for Public Appointments Northern Ireland. However, the OECD and the previous committee's recommendations would also see appropriate competence in fiscal and economic scrutiny and experience relating to the understanding of Northern Ireland's public expenditure to be made explicit within those appointments. Further, the Secretariat working for the Council has also been considered in terms of their level of expertise and independence, notably considerations of avoiding institutional capture. This is staff having formal and informal connection to the Executive or the Northern Ireland Civil Service. Access to information is another next issue. The bill provides detail of the Northern Ireland Fiscal Council's right to access Northern Ireland government information, and the Fiscal Council will publish an annual statement around the quality of information and any gaps in the data or information they receive. The OECD notes the importance of having access to information for all IFIs to carry out their role. The Northern Ireland Fiscal Council themselves have also previously stated that the issue of access to information is the most frequent complaint from fiscal councils around the world. And then finally, the issues identified in Section 4, finance and funding. Currently, the bill provides for the Northern Ireland Fiscal Council running costs to be included in the Department of Finance overall estimate to the Assembly. However, it is noted by stakeholders that more resources will be required over time, especially if the remit of the Fiscal Council was to expand. Further to this, the OECD recommends that multi-annual funding commitments may further enhance an IFI's independence and provides additional protection from political pressure. The paper notes that a number of independent bodies in Northern Ireland currently avail of multi-year funding, such as the Northern Ireland Audit Office and the Public Service Ombudsman Northern Ireland. And finally, looking at more detail on funding, Section 5 presents a review of the bill costs. The paper notes that paragraph 16 of the explanatory financial memorandum details a cost of approximately $511,000 to run the Fiscal Council in 24-25. Ray's then asked the department for more detail in terms of the breakdown of this figure, and that's presented at Table 3. I think it starts at page 308 of the pack. And then in seeking further information of future costs, DOF informed Riz that a budget allocation of $616,000 has been provided for 25-26. The $61,000 increase on the year has been explained as a result primarily of changes to national insurance and agreed pay increases. Other future costs based on the council being put on a statutory front have also been examined. In terms of staffing, this is expected in the initial period to be broadly similar to current structures of the Northern Fiscal Council. Some additional administrative support is being considered with an additional annual cost of £45,000. Future operating costs have also been considered, as a number of these functions are currently carried out by the Department of Finance, such as accommodation cost, IT support, HR services, office support and finance management. The department has noted it is anticipated that the Northern Fiscal Council will align with similar sized non-departmental public bodies. The example provided is that of the Criminal Justice Inspection Northern Ireland, in which the corporate functions are supplied by the Northern Ireland Civil Service Shared Services. Based on the size of the Northern Ireland Fiscal Council, the department concluded that a standalone corporate systems would have a significant cost, and the shared system model utilising a service level agreement will likely represent the best value for money. Currently, an approximate increase of $110,000 for the corporate functions would be required. And I'll finish there and take the questions.
It's really helpful. I actually don't know, and I should do, where their office space is.
They're in PwC's building now.
Of course, right, okay. That's really helpful. Thank you, Nathan. I suppose one question might be, first of all, you've looked at the OECD recommendations around independent IFIs, independent fiscal institutions. Are there any, could you summarise, you kind of alluded to some of it, could you summarise any specific ways in which this bill diverges from what they describe as best practice?
Well, as I say, I think it was presented in that Section 4 when we have identified those 4 points. Yeah. The divergence, I suppose the highlighted one was the just went blank. The legislation, when you're mandating for what an independent fiscal institution will do, what its roles and responsibilities will be,
Yeah.
and that use of secondary legislation, that's something that they have been trying to avoid, that everything is set out clearly in the primary legislation.
Because the risk is then, if it has to be secondary legislation, then either it'll never happen because the minister responsible, and this might be any minister from any party, like inherently in any fiscal institution anywhere, it's the whole point is that they're a bit of an, not necessarily an irritant, but they're a watchdog of sorts. So you're not necessarily going to want to bring forward secondary legislation to increase their powers once they're operational and they're scrutinising you.
Well, as I say in other parts of the paper, the OECD, it's about that independence role, to be able to hold government, to hold departments to account, and to give them that power initially rather than trying to get it later. I think is one of the aspects that to carry out their function effectively, it's to give them that power to do that, and to make that they should have, in most cases, the power to choose what they investigate, what they look into, rather than being slightly restricted by maybe their powers. As I said, there's only a few clear definitions of what is going to be required of the Fiscal Council at present, and the other work they may carry out during the year will be sort of subject to themselves. But by giving them that power in the initial, I think then that gives them that degree to carry out their scrutiny role more effectively, is what the OECD was sort of pushing for.
Okay. Yeah. So is that's not covered then in clause 4? So 4.4b in the Act, it says a fiscal sustainability report may relate to, and this is the bit of the bill that gives a bit more expansiveness to the council. So this is 4.4b, such of those matters or such description of those matters as the council considers appropriate, a thematic report. But that still has to be a fiscal sustainability report. Yeah. It can't be, for example, a report about economic performance, which may have some relation to fiscal performance, but it's not specifically.
With the non-specific nature, perhaps it could be, but without having that detailed in the legislation, I think that's where there could be some uncertainty as to around what they could actually carry out in certain cases.
It was the initiative part.
Okay.
Thing for ombudsman.
So there's basically this bill constrains the Fiscal Council to be essentially fiscal sustainability matters quite specifically, whereas you tell me if you think this is unfair or you're not willing to endorse this statement. It constrains the Fiscal Council to fiscal matters. Now you might say that's what they're called, the Fiscal Council, in the same way the Criminal Justice Inspector isn't allowed to go off and inspect hospitals or schools. But the OECD recommend a bit more flexibility to do things that the Fiscal Council deem to be germane.
We'll fully commit to that, but really it's saying that looking forward at what perhaps they want to do or what is felt they should be doing should be contained within the primary legislation, and that should be clearly defined. Okay. So there is no ambiguity as to where there may be issues of them going outside the remit, if that is something that is expected of them, or people would like to see them do, to set that out clearly in the primary legislation.
In fairness, it is in some ways fairly laid out in the legislation in that case. Okay. Any other questions that wish to come in? Diane, Deputy Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks, Nathan, for this. I just wanted to ask, where you're mentioning and referencing a lot of the consultation, and then the paper where you're comparing it to other jurisdictions, it all obviously was done in like 2020, 2021, so obviously that was just right at the time where we went into the pandemic, and since then, like 5 years is a long enough period of time, but just given that there's quite a different global economy now, I just wonder, do you think there would be scope to dip in and do a brief update of some of those things, especially the other jurisdictions, as to what went well through that responsive period over the 5 years? And because we're starting in fresh in 2025, and it would be good to go in with all that information.
That I suppose it would be that responsive to the pandemic and the legal structures. I don't think there has been much change since the foundation. It may be more what they did during that time or what actions they took to analyse the economies or the fiscal or the finances of those particular administrations at the time and how that helped or supported. But in terms of the legislative, I'm not aware of much change within that would be very different to what was in that original paper. But as I say, from a position of how they or supported the administrations during that time, there may be something could be worked on there. But from a legislative point of view, I'd say it's very little, minimal changes have occurred since that paper.
Yeah, just you know, sometimes in times of crisis, it exposes some small legislative weakness that wasn't that didn't allow you to do something. So it just would be interesting if we could.
Absolutely, I could go back and check if there has been reviews done or within reports around those institutions, if we could get something.
Yeah, no, that would be grand. And then just wanted to ask just around the independence of this, and from looking in at it, do you think that there's strong enough independence, like you referenced there in the Northern Ireland Audit Office and the Public Service Ombudsman? I sit in the Audit Committee as well, and obviously the budgets of those are going straight into the Audit Committee, that they're not bidding into the Department of Finance, who they're primarily coming in to scrutinise. Do you think that there's enough degrees of separation here?
I'm not making a judgment call on that, rather just stating where these issues are recurrent in other institutions and the recommendations have come up. It's very much, I think, interpretation of others to decide if what level of independence is right or appropriate or how that can be achieved. But really clearly it was more for, in the case of an international institution like the OECD, providing these as a key issue to consider, because independence for them is a key aspect of having these institutions. If you're going to have them, their independence is a key aspect of doing that and allowing them to hold governments to account. So I'm not making a judgment on it, but clearly as a global institution, the OECD, they find that a very key issue that should be considered when the creation and setting up of an institution like that. I know we already have, but even put on a statutory basis, that is important.
Yeah, thanks very much. No, definitely be taking that forward as a committee. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else wish to ask a question on the report? No. Is it just? It's just worth. Did your Nathan? It may be something you didn't directly look at. Diane mentioned the issue of the budget coming from the department directly rather than via the audit committee, which is obviously the case in the audit office in NIPSO, as Dan said. Are there other precedents in these islands either way? I'm aware, I think the budget of the OBR is set by the Treasury, but do you know any other examples of how they're set?
Yeah, I would need to go back to that paper and check how the setup there. I probably, as I say, in that particular case of the comparative piece, my colleague did prepare it, and I have looked at it again, but just on that particular point, it's not something I can recall off the top of my head, but I can definitely go back to that paper and check that position, and if it's not there, could follow up. But first protocol would be that previous paper on the comparative piece and any look at other jurisdictions and their fiscal commissions, councils.
Okay, that's helpful. And just on the right of access, which is obviously a huge part of the ability of the department. Are there any specific? You might be able to give us a kind of sense of what this bill confers on the Fiscal Council in terms of the legal power to require information.
Yes, the bill requiring for access to information is a key part of any of these institutions. As I say, at the minute, the Fiscal Council has a number of memorandums of understanding with individual departments or with service. I'm not entirely sure on that, but I suppose I need to consider that further as to what exactly how this will be different to what they already have, other than giving them that statutory basis where they maybe feel there is a lack of information coming, or those memorandums or understand at present aren't maybe as robust as they could be, that perhaps given this legal and statutory footing would make those more robust, and that is a key aspect of that access to information, is the robustness of that information coming, the quality and the timeliness of it to be able to give that. I think perhaps the legislation may give more back into that and make requirements for that to be more timely, to come, they can get a bit better agreement with the individual. But say it's Northern Ireland Government Departments, and I would suspect they would probably, as an institution, want to have agreements with other institutions that are relevant, but that might fall outside of the bill at present, but that may not be possible to get.
The other institutions, does that mean other, what do you mean, other, like Whitehall departments?
Whitehall departments, like when it comes to...
Yeah, I remember that, yeah. It just, on the, there isn't is there an explicit, unless I've missed it, I'm just looking for the explicit, how explicitly it gives the Fiscal Council the power to compel or get information. One, on clause 6, it 6.1 gives the council, quote, complete discretion in carrying out its functions. Then it says, in particular, the council is not subject to the direction or control of a minister, a Northern Ireland Department, a minister of the Crown, or the UK government, or the Assembly. Then the next section, the next subsection says subsections 1 and 2 are subject to any duty imposed on the council by any statutory provision, including this act. So that may be something we want to unpack more, what that means, what that subsection means, and to what extent that negates the previous requirements.
I think if we go back just on that point, if you look at the 2021 previous Finance Committee report and what was being suggested there in terms of access to information, I think there was more detail that could be considered in terms of how to frame access to information and who the roles and responsibilities there. I think we have that in the paper at some point, but I just off the top of my head don't exactly know where.
Okay, it'll be helpful to get that. Yeah, okay. Are there anybody else have any other questions for Nathan at this stage? Okay, Nathan, that was helpful. Thank you very much both for the report, and I suspect we will be calling on you either to give oral evidence or to or for follow-up questions. No problem. Thank you very much, and thank you also to Rachel. Okay. Thank you. Okay, now members, we have, I think we've gone through everything there that we need to. We're now moving on to agenda item 8. No, we're not. Sorry, we're not. Oh, I need to go. Okay. Okay, members. So we're going to go to several papers to note in relation to this. Page 314 of the meeting pack is the delegated powers memorandum for the bill. This has already been sent to the ESR for advice. Page 316 is correspondence from the Finance Minister to Paul Frew, our colleague, regarding comments made during the second stage debate on the bill relating to disqualification from appointment and clarification on the position of the Fiscal Council Chief of Staff. I don't know if you want to expand on any of that, Paul?
No, they have come back with the explanation, and I'm content with that.
Okay.
I must commend the departments, because on the two bills that we've dealt with today, they did come back quite sharpish with regards to explanations. This is one of them. I suppose that's why you need a second stage.
Yeah. Okay. And then page 318 of the meeting pack are a number of nil returns to our call for evidence from the Justice, Agriculture and Infrastructure Committees, and a nil response from the Office for Budget Responsibility, which is nice.
They don't comment.
Oh,
on it's a
fair enough. That makes sense. Fine. Okay. Agenda item 8 is the Banking and Financial Services Landscape Inquiry Agreement of our report. Now, before we consider the draft report, members will wish to note the following, which have been incorporated into the draft report. And obviously members had the opportunity both over the summer and then with an updated, we had versions before the summer, and then we got an updated version a couple of weeks ago, which the team emailed around to people for additional comments, and the pack has the latest version of the draft report reflecting any returns. The following things have obviously been included. Written comments from Social Enterprise NI, through page 324 of the meeting pack. Further comments from AIB concerning autonomy in lending decisions, highlighting that the vast majority of decisions, excluding automated lending decisions, are made locally by their leadership teams. So we are going to go into closed session now to formally consider the our report. Thanks, Heather. Okay. Okay, I think we're back in. So we can now confirm that the fifth report of the Finance Committee has been agreed. That's on our Banking and Financial Services inquiry, and it will be reflected in the minutes of proceedings. So at page 384 of the meeting pack, members will see correspondence from HM Treasury regarding the Committee's inquiry and the context that it provides for the UK financial inclusion strategy. Members had previously agreed to copy relevant recommendations to the Treasury in advance of the summer recess, so that's to note that correspondence. Page 408 of the meeting pack, there is an ABI, Association of British Insurers, press release on motor insurance premiums. Just a note. Page 411 of the meeting pack, there's notification from the Financial Conduct Authority of reports published in relation to motor and home insurance. All of these are for noting. Okay, so we have now agreed our report on that, and obviously we will be having a launch event in a couple of weeks. Yep. 2 weeks yesterday, and we will hopefully be moving a motion for the Assembly. Just going to put on record my thanks to all of the committee for engaging in this constructive. I think we've got a really good report which will reflect lots of a very important area that is not the direct virus of the department, but is a huge issue both for all of our constituents and our economy, but also an area where I think we're all agreed that there is this much scope for more locally focused policy making, and I also want to put on record thanks to the committee staff for their forbearance and energy in getting us a very wide range of evidence, producing a report which I think does us as a committee credit, and our staff. So very warm thank you to all of you for producing a very solid bit of work, in addition to a very heavy workload of fiscal budgetary scrutiny and other legislation. Thank you. Okay, folks, agenda item 9 is the Coronavirus Act 2020. Almost for old time's sake, registration of deaths and stillbirths extension order. We're going to extend it one more time, maybe just once more. Members, the department proposes to make a statutory rule, the Coronavirus Act 2020 registration of deaths and stillbirths extension number 2 order Northern Ireland 2025. The proposed statutory rule will extend the expiry date of the temporary provisions in the Coronavirus Act 2020 in relation to death and stillbirth registration. As we've discussed in this committee several times before, the rule is subject to confirmatory resolution procedure before the Assembly. A clerk's cover note, relevant correspondence and full details of the proposed rule can be found at page 418. So members, this obviously happens in the context of the bill which we have just spent a long time discussing in this committee, and that we required one more extension, hopefully one more extension. Are there any comments, or are members content with this extension, subject to the primary legislation which we hope to be passing soon and were discussing in detail earlier? Mr. Frew.
Yeah, just feel like this is like an old friend coming back to visit every so often.
Friend or an enemy?
A foe, maybe a foe's bit, but and I'd usually at this stage be having kittens just about now with this extension, but we have to acknowledge the work of the department in bringing forward the death, stillbirths and baby loss bill, and we understand why the delay in that was because they added the baby loss part, which is significant and something that my party has pushed for and this committee has pushed for a long time. So we acknowledge that work, we acknowledge the work that we have interacted with the department, and I applaud this committee for the work that it has done in applying pressure on the department as to the necessity and the need for these extensions, and then of course pursuing the legislative procedures until we get to this point today. And hopefully this will be the last time that we will ever have to extend a piece of atrocious legislation like the Coronavirus Act 2020.
Okay,
No, so
Oh,
we do.
in that case, we will. I think we can subject to indicate the members are content, subject to comments that have been made. Okay. Agenda item 10, SR 2025-143, the Legal Complaints and Regulation 2016 Act, commencement number 1, Order Northern Ireland, 2025. Members, at page 427 of the meeting pack, there is correspondence from the Department. On the 28th of August, the Department formally laid a commencement order which brought into operation the Legal Complaints and Regulation Act Northern Ireland 2016. Other than sections 9, 19.2c, sorry, it accepted several parts of it, 9, 19.2c, 38.2c, and paragraph 2.4 of Schedule 4 to that Act. So those came into effect on, they came into effect on 1st of September 2025. At its meeting on the 21st of May, members noted that this would come into operation. This is a commencement order and for noting only, therefore. So agenda item 11 is correspondence. There's a lot of correspondence. I hope to get through as much of it as possible. While we're still here, just to free up our future sessions. The Minister has written, so agenda is 11.1, our first item of correspondence relates to an amendment to civil service advertising policy, and that's at page 432. The Minister has written to the committee in relation to inform us the mandatory requirement to advertise all external recruitment opportunities in the 3 daily newspapers has been removed. The Minister highlights that over a 6-year period, only 2.04% of applicants learned about job opportunities through these publications, whereas 51.6% used the Civil Service recruitment website. In recent years, the Civil Service has diversified its advertising channels to include its own website, specialist publications, online platforms, radio and billboards. I'm just going to seek agreement on this to copy the correspondence in a second, but I'll bring in Mr. Brett. Beforehand, I just want to put on the record, and it's not really an interest of mine anymore because the committee that my APG is currently in abeyance, but I had set up previously an all-party group on media sustainability and press freedom. I actually, though it's not the most hard-headed view perhaps in the world, I think this is in a small way regrettable because I personally think that local newspapers are hugely important. They are, I think, in an age of disinformation and misinformation, a vital public good, even if we don't agree with everything that's in the Belfast Telegraph, the Irish News, the newsletter every day. Clearly they represent different perspectives, and also so does the Antrim Guardian and the Anderson Sound News and the Down Recorder. But these relate specifically to the 3 local dailies. I personally think this was a small area where this advertising policy reflected given that we all spend a lot of money on, or a lot of money is spent on public service broadcasting, I think reflecting the fact that daily newspapers are a public good in an age when, as we all understand as public representatives, information is quality information is declining. I think it's a regrettable decision, but I understand why it's been made. I want to put that on the record. I'll bring in Philip Brett first and then Jerry Carroll.
Thank you, Chair, and I share some of your concerns, but one concern I just wanted to raise was just point 2 of at the end of the Minister's letter, where it talks about the flexible approach being introduced, and it states that where deemed appropriate, they would use newspapers. So I'm just keen to see who would define what appropriate is. I would just have some concern that regardless of who the Minister who holds that office is, may decide that he or she may wishes to only advertise in one particular newspaper, which may set their or suit their political agenda. So I just want to try and work out that can't be the case, that they can't just pick one newspaper.
I think it's very wise for us to ask for more detail on this, because I think there is leaving aside the question of part of the reason, obviously we have a society with kind of newspapers with historic perspectives and people who are more likely to read the newsletter version, more likely to read the Irish News, and we all know that, and that's part of the reason why there was a kind of a consistency about advertising in all 3 daily newspapers, as well as I think a value to supporting media, local media. But I think it is worth us asking that question, because I think there is that flexibility at the Minister's discretion rather than a consistent policy. So I think it is worth us asking for the Minister or the Department at least to address that potential anomaly. I'll bring in Jerry, Carol, and then Dr. Aiken.
Yeah, thanks. Sure, the concerns about sort of the media outlets and kind of declining media, and obviously the need for general supporting of them, which this would, I think, a significant amount of money over a few years, and would be missed by those outlets. I also have a concern and a question, Chair, about people with sort of disabilities, visual impairments, people who may not be tech savvy, and I don't claim to be the most tech savvy myself, who might miss job opportunities, might miss applications. So, like, was there a disability screening, EQIA, or any other appropriate focus, particularly on disabilities around that, and people who are elderly and vulnerable, and also, like, given the fact that quite often our correspondence and meetings with the department, it's taken upwards of 9 months to a year before a lot of these jobs are being filled. So I'm concerned that by removing this, people could be missed and job opportunities aren't filled in a quickly fashion. So I don't think this is the wisest decision.
Steve Aiken.
Yeah, and I sort of concur with both remarks, both from sort of Philip and from Jerry. But there's two additional issues that fill me with concern. The first one is, many of you talked to sort of some of the proprietors of some of the smaller newspapers and the rest of it. What's going to be the knock-on effect? Because the civil service aren't going to put in the major newspapers. The councils then decide not to put into the smaller newspapers. We're into a lot of the revenue streams are going to disappear, and I think the margins with a lot of the newspapers are extraordinarily tight. So that's the first level of concern. The second one's a more broader point. One of the few ways that people find out what's happening in the civil service and what's happening in the changes to the civil service is seeing jobs being advertised. People just don't know. And for the general public to understand and have openness and transparency of what's happening in the civil service, if it's kept relatively tight and it's only pushed out in professional websites or wherever they decide to push it, the public will not know what is happening in the civil service. I mean, how did we know that sort of so many senior grade civil servants were changing recently? One of the first reasons was we saw it being advertised in the paper. If that disappears, we wouldn't know, and when would we find out? That's probably one of those are my two largest concerns, Chair, and I think that is one of the things that we're missing here, particularly in an area the size of Northern Ireland, just pulling sort of these jobs out. You know, I've seen a lot of the jobs being advertised on the Guardian website. That's fine, but you know, who in Northern Ireland is going to read the Guardian website, apart from me?
Gemma.
I understand what you're saying, but like realistically, it says only 2.04% of applicants learned about the jobs in the newspaper.
No, it's not. Sorry, apologies to the Chair. It was the wider issue. It's informing the public of what's going on within the civil service, and that's one of the issues that if you don't put up the job specifications, people will not understand there's been a change in permanent secretaries or various of the senior grades or things that are changing. You just don't get to see that. We find it difficult enough to understand what's going on.
You just ask for more detail.
I think more detail is
important.
I think it may be that this
Decision already been made, hasn't it?
decision has been made, and we're not being consulted on this. It's not a statutory. We don't have any ability to vote against it. The changes come into effect. I think it is worth us. I think it's worth putting on record genuine concerns. I mean, like, it's important. The Finance Minister has a job to do in terms of ensuring best use of public money. In this context, there is a broader context which is around clarity of information for, indeed, and there are other public bodies that may make similar decisions. I think, given the public concern around the viability of local newspapers and the onward impact that has in terms of basically, a public meeting place that is local newspapers and local media, I just think it's a question worth asking. So we'll ask for a bit more information on that. People are content, but it's clearly this decision has been made and we don't get a vote on it. But I think it's fair enough to express concern. Okay, next one is about hybrid working policy. The department, that's on page 434. The department has updated the committee, on the recent review of NIC's hybrid working. An updated policy will be implemented from September, and the key policy changes have been outlined in the update that was sent to us at the start of August. Members may wish to note that the GMB and Unite Trade Unions have endorsed the updated policy, while the Central Trade Union side, which is NIPSA, FDA and the Prison Officers Association, have not. mainly due to concerns regarding the 40% minimum workplace attendance requirement for civil servants, and in the case of the FDA, expectation for senior civil servants. I will bring in Diane first, if anybody else wishes to come in on it.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. On this particular one, this is one where I have asked a number of questions over the past year and a half on it, and I think that it's quite poor that there was no centralised information or data on where anybody was working. It was just very ad hoc, locally measured, and nobody seemed to have any central idea of what was going on. So I really welcome the move to having a clear policy on this, but I wonder if we could have some sort of clarity on what measures will be in place. So they've brought this in, that they're moving towards this 40% minimum now from September. I'd like to see an update on how they're going to monitor that, and to get the data in terms of which grade this is at and which department that it is within, because I know as we're moving into the autumn, we're talking about our next inquiry being around the people strategy across the civil service. But I think that where you have different departments having more people in the office, different hybrid working arrangements and different grades, either in or out of the office at different times, you could very potentially link that to a lot of the issues, the grievances, sick leaves and things. So I just would be keen to know, as they're moving towards this, what information's out there and how many people are looking to be in or out of the office and not getting that request. So just some information around that, because the lack of monitoring to date and lack of idea of how it's going to be monitored going forward gives me great concern.
Can I suggest, I think that those are all important questions to ask, can I suggest we consolidate them as part of our preparation for our next inquiry, which is our civil service one, because that's going to cover civil service things like sickness absence, and I think this can be a question that we ask. So yes, I think we should certainly ask those questions. It might be just worth us doing that in the context of us.
Chair, as they're saying, September, this policy changes this month, and we're now on the 10th of September. I think it would be worth understanding how they're measuring that now in the interim.
Just understand how you measure. Do you mean measure as in like gathering information about like proportion of it? So if they're saying 40%, how do they know it's 40%, or are they just saying it's 40%, but we're not actually measuring it?
Yeah, Chair, just from questions that I have put before, they were not centrally able to give me any information on any department, any grade, as to how many days in the office there was in the civil service. Okay. So just as to how they're gathering that, to know that they're actually implementing this policy.
Can I then suggest, then perhaps the question we ask are basically for more background to the context of this, which includes the measurement questions you have asked, but also the specific rationale. So they must have had a reason for doing this. Do you know what I mean?
Possibly my persistent question.
Possibly, quite possibly, yeah. But anyway, we can ask that question. I'm going to bring out Jerry, Karen.
Yeah, just kind of, I think more information. I mean, I've received emails over the last few months when this was being touted from people who are kind of concerned about, civil service buildings are being sold off. They're saying there's no capacity in offices for this to be implemented, and so on and so forth. So, and obviously, like, Unite are broadly supportive, and that's fair enough. I'm a member of Unite, just to declare that. But I think NIPS is the biggest civil service union, so the biggest civil service union have an issue with it. So I think it'd be worthwhile. Also, given kind of what Deputy Chair is saying, is to have a briefing from the department on this quite soon. And if I can suggest, we're doing a forward work programme later on, but a back to back when maybe the unions and afterwards, because quite often civil service can say one thing, and workplace and on the ground kind of interpretation of that is quite different. So
yes, but can I suggest, I don't, because I would imagine we will definitely be engaging with the trade unions in our civil service work. So I don't want to set up a separate briefing session just on this when we're going to have the trade unions in front of us anyway. So I think it probably makes sense to cover this when we have. Do you know what I mean?
I think we're missing the chance of it's coming in now, Charter, to be honest.
But we're doing our civil. I just mean.
When's that happen?
Well, it's autumn, like, and it'll be in the forward work group.
We're gathering. The committee's done a lot of discussion about different aspects. So what our plan currently is, Tom is bringing together all the information. So we've asked a lot of questions and we've had a lot of data coming back, and then we do a strategy session specifically on this. Ideally this month, possibly early next month. that gives the committee an opportunity to discuss exactly how they want to approach this next inquiry.
I think it's more to say we're not being we don't have to. So yes, it's starting from September 2025, but we're not approving this. We're not our role to. So
Our job is to reflect the concerns that are being brought about it, and
well, yeah, but I think we'll have the opportunity to do that though in the civil. But so yes, I agree. But I'm just trying to kind of manage our work program because we've got legislation, and I just don't think we need to have necessarily, if we're having, for example, the trade unions and the civil service people or whatever the HR people in with us in mid-October. I don't think we need to have them with us in late September as well as, do you know what I mean? I'm just trying to manage. This is only a scheduling question. I'm not disputing that we should be covering the issues. Just trying to manage our workload. So, but to that extent, I think it is right to engage, as Diane said, on the department, on the context, how they're monitoring, and Jerry, as Jerry said, to engage and flag to the unions, and we can get written responses from them in advance of oral evidence sessions, which will cover broader civil service questions where we can cover this. Are people content with that? Just Stevie, can you want to
just a quick one.
Paul through.
Quite interesting because it was pointed out to me by several members, senior members of the civil service, in the hybrid working plan. I think it's on our page of our records is 446, and they pointed out to me the contradiction that this seems to be running through the whole thing, and I thought it was quite strange until I've actually read it. But if you look at 4.8, it says senior management will, as far as possible, facilitate hybrid working. And then 4.9, senior management will also encourage promote the benefits of workplace attendance in the same sentence. And, you know, I've had senior civil servants say this is entirely Kafkaesque and they don't know exactly what's going on and where it is. It just, and I really agree with you, Chair. I'm not disagreeing, and we've got a lot of stuff in our programme as well. But Jerry's got a point, he'd say, but, you know, Jerry's got another good point. This is quite, it doesn't make a lot of sense, and I think we as a committee should be doing some of the sense check on this.
Yeah, I agree with that, but we have a civil service. We are doing sense check on it because we have like we just have to keep, like, we know vast numbers of matters are arising for the Clerk team. We are doing it because we literally have an inquiry into this subject in the next couple of months, so we can ask all these questions. I think the key question to ask is, why is this happening? If they aren't monitoring, if they have no means of monitoring how many people are in the office, then is it because they think they have a problem? And if they're up for hybrid working, why are they? What's the rationale for this new minimum requirement? I think all those are very good questions to ask. We should get them. We can discuss them in information return, and then we'll have evidence sessions with the Department on Civil Service Reform and indeed the unions. I think we can cover this because I think this is linked to civil service performance work. And like all the questions were around attendance and around whether civil servants feel properly valued and managed properly. It's all linked. Paul Frew.
Yeah, but I suppose it's the new age we live in, but I have massive concerns about what we have lived through for the last 5 years, and the production and the responsiveness of the civil service and staff. But I also recognise the flexibility that brings is good for work-life balance. But the issue I have is this, and I agree with Diane, Deputy Chair, about the monitoring and measuring of this. You take some of our civil service who may well be, let's take for instance engineers, they will be hybrid working from home and in the office, but they will also be out on site. Yeah. And what does that constitute? Is that office working or home working or just out of the office? So
that's obviously office. If you're not working from home, then you're working. Then there are lots of rules.
So do we know that?
It might
and
just
do they measure that?
It might just be useful to insert at that point. Their policy is the Assembly's quite far ahead of this because we've already got all of this locked in. The 40% is always subject to business need, and it's also subject to ability of the role to be hybrid. So, for example, here, our ushers can't ush. Is ush a word?
Remotely.
Is ush a word?
Yeah, that's true.
They can't work from home. Whereas other rules are more flexible, but it is absolutely all down to business need. I think it's just trying to clarify whether theirs is as kind of clear as what they said.
One of the massive concerns I've had with hybrid working over the last 5 years is apprenticeships and training. How do you learn a job if you aren't among your peers? And I think that's been a massive miss over the last 5 years.
Well, there are lots of observations about how, like, I think there are. This is something I think that we can properly get into in our civils, because there will be people who are actually, this has been hugely beneficial for them, and I think there'll be people who this has improved their productivity, improved their mental well-being, their work-life balance, because they live in rural areas, they have caring responsibilities, they're getting in and out of maybe a long commute. This actually is, is beneficial for them. There will be other people who at a different stage in their career, it's not actually particularly beneficial for them, and there's not one size. It's one of these things where there's not one ideological thing over at different times in their lives, different kinds of roles, different caring responsibilities, different ambitions. There's no uniform approach in this, so there's no ideological yes or no, and I think it's something we can understand when we interrogate the civil service people about whether whether their policy is responsive enough and what actual input is, because they should have thought through the overall workforce needs and the balance of all that, and I think that's definitely one for us to be interrogating. Okay, members, that's a useful discussion. Now we have 11.3, which is the Special Advisor Annual Report, which is at 492 of the meeting pack, and that is to note, unless anybody specifically wants to raise anything about the Special Advisor Annual Report. No?
Sorry, you're being very quiet. What's going on with you?
I mean, there are things people can follow up with matters if they wish to, in their own time or separately. Okay. The next agenda item is 11.4 to 11.7, and that is the annual report and accounts of the NI Audit Office, superannuation and other. So that the Audit Office is at page 501 of the meeting pack. Superannuation and other allowances pension scheme statement is at page 623. The UK Statistics Authority annual reports at page 699. The Financial Reporting Advisory Boards at page 901. These are really to note unless anybody wishes to come in. I'm happy enough. 11.8 is the Department of Finance appointments to the Board of Utility Regulator. That's at page 965. Members, the committee has been notified of 2 new board appointments to the Board of the Utility Regulator, from the 25th of August for a 7-year period. That's to note.
Sorry, can I
yes,
just come in there, Chair? It's interesting, but what has normally happened sometimes with appointments to various utility regulators and boards is reasons why they've been appointed, not just the name. And I just wonder if we can have any more details of what specifically they brought to be able to appoint it to the utility regulator. Because previously we've had examples of people who've gone on the magic roundabout from one place to another without any explanation, apart from the fact that they might have been had a senior civil service post and gone to the next one. And normally you would get in public appointments process, you would actually get a bio and why those people were selected.
I presume with some of this information will be covered in. There will have been a press release and other information on the utility regulator. Yeah, so they are there. I also would say they are subject to the work of the public appointments, the Commissioner of Public Appointments. So, can I suggest, Dr. Gibbons, if you want to go and have a look at the, and if you have any particular concerns,
It's not concerns, it's just sort of, I know Mr. Freud probably has similar sort of views on that as well.
I think in these cases, from what I can see, these are relatively technical. The utility regulator does extremely technical work. So, but by all means, and if there's a specific concern, I will bring it back to the committee. At this point, I think I would go and have a look, but I'm content that if they've been through the public appointments process, and if there are any specific concerns, they can be raised. Okay. Yes, indeed. Our birthday colleague is
1, 2, 3, 4.
Leaving us for.
Jeremy's still here.
Okay. Celebrate. So the 11.9 is Audit Office report on major IT projects. Sorry, Deputy Chair wants to come in. Okay. The Audit Office report on major IT projects. That's page 966. The NIAO has published its report into major IT projects in Northern Ireland. It concludes that the current approach to major IT projects, if continued, will result in continued risk to value for money and missed opportunities to realise the benefits that can be delivered through ever-changing and evolving technologies. Now, it's worth just saying this is for the public. It's not, that stuff isn't relevant for us, and it's definitely important that we are familiarised and are sort of seized of this report. But in terms of scrutiny of the Public Accounts Committee at this point, but the Deputy Chair wanted to come in.
Thank you. Yeah, and just as clear, I sit in the Public Accounts Committee as well, but I just wanted to highlight it here as, even though that report on major IT projects will be going to the Public Accounts Committee, as shared services, they'll be falling to the Department of Finance, and in particular the project of Integrate. And I think it's something that it would be really useful if we as a committee were able to engage or go out and visit Integrate, or do a little bit more around that, as it is progressing at pace, and it's going to really change the way that HR and finance is managed across the civil service.
Yep. Agreed.
I know the department's very keen for a visit from the committee, so we look to schedule that.
Yes, subject to. So, yeah, subject to.
Probably make it part of the inquiry, in fact.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to move on to items. A few items which are going to be considered together. One of which is in relation to, from the Justice Committee, in relation to responsibilities in relation to family courts, and the other one is correspondence from an individual re domestic abuse. So this is at page, the first one from the Justice Committee is at page 1060 of the meeting pack, and the second item is correspondence from an individual, which is at page 1377 to 1387. The committee has been copied into correspondence from an individual who has copied a number of different departments, MP, Speaker in the Justice Committee. Clarification information have been sought in relation to departmental and statutory responsibilities, in relation to private and family law proceedings. The same individual has written to the Department of Communities about that department's responsibilities in relation to gender equality support, social inclusion and support for children and protective parents affected by domestic abuse, particularly where public or private family law proceedings have had a material impact on their safety, well-being or socio-economic circumstances. The individuals copied this committee into all the correspondence in the Justice Committee who considered the correspondence subsequently agreed to forward the correspondence to this committee. The Justice Committee also agreed to ask the Department for Finance for clarification on whether any reviews of the Children Northern Ireland Order 1985 have been conducted, or if there are any plans to do so. Another individual has copied the committee into correspondence to the Speaker outlining concerns about institutional failures and response to domestic abuse. As members will be aware, the committee has an agreed approach relating to correspondence which is not linked to our statutory duties or agreed priorities. Part of this relates to correspondence seeking information with the department or public body is best to forwarding it to the department or public body which is best placed to respond to the person. And we respond to them with the relevant contact details. As the individual has already sought information from other departments, members may wish to advise the correspondent of this approach, meaning what individually we may wish to respond to them, or
we let them know, which departments are leading.
Yeah. I'm not entirely clear why we were, just as a general point, what our locus is in the Children Northern Ireland Order 95.
Chair, what happens is when everybody is copied in like this, we have a statutory duty to bring it to the committee, whether or not this committee has any relevant locus.
Oh, right, fair enough.
All right. Okay.
What usually then happens is we have a discussion amongst committees to ascertain which department has indicated it will take a lead. So, the likes of the Victoria Square Apartments and so on, there was a designated lead on that. So the same has happened in this case, where departments have decided who's going to take it forward, and then the relevant committee falls in behind that. So essentially what we'd be telling the correspondent is that there are other departments in the lead on this, and our department doesn't have a locus.
Okay. Jerry, you want to come in?
Just that, I was just asking, we're going to ask will we include it just because we were CC'd into the email, is that okay?
Okay.
That's it.
One of the things of emails, the CC has become a bit of a thing for us now.
So, okay. 11.11 is from the Assembly and Executive Reform Committee or Review Committee, and it's about review of cross-cutting executive strategies. I should note as a declaring interest, I also sit on that committee. So that's at page 1066 of the meeting pack. AERC has issued a reminder to all committees regarding its call for evidence on review of cross-cutting executive strategies. We are going to do a response and and we'll have a draft for people to comment on in the next few weeks. That's to note in the meantime. 11.12 is from the Financial Conduct Authority. It's page 1071. The Financial Conduct Authority has published both its second annual report on the secondary international competitive and growth objective, its 2024-25 annual report and accounts, and its strategy for 25-30. I suppose it would be germane once we have our report published and our corresponding with the FCA to ask them how their strategy will reflect the specific points we have raised or the differential issues in Northern Ireland. I think that was something that came up in our evidence session, that there wasn't necessarily a huge focus on how distinct our needs are here, so I think that's worth us following up with them on, having marked that specific part. And I know now obviously they have an individual who is working here and focused on this area, or this region. So that's to note. 11.13 is a pivotal report on 18 months of the NI executive, which was well covered in the last week. That's at page 1329. That's to note. Item 11.14 is Hansard transcript of the oral briefing on service delivery, on the service delivery brochure, the procurement brochure, which we got that we got that on the 2nd of July, just before we broke up for summer. That's at page 1365 of the meeting pack. That's to note. 11.21 is from the Financial Conduct Authority, and that is a devolved nations team statement on workplace saving schemes. That's at page 1388 of the meeting pack, around providing guidance around the rules around the schemes and information and detail on requirements for employers. I just have one slightly facetious question to ask, which is, I wasn't aware, the Devolved Nations team, is that just a team of, like a name for a group of people who work together in the FCA? But given they have created this as a structure that they're communicating with, it would be interesting for us to find out more. But is that a new development? And
No, Chair, that's
always existed?
Each of the three devolved nations. Yeah. Sorry, each of the three devolved nations has a person. So there's a Northern Ireland person, a Wales person, and a Scotland person. So they collectively become the devolution nations team, devolved nations team, and then they have a management structure above them.
Okay. Yeah, I just wondered because I hadn't heard that term used.
No, they've started using it because we started to engage.
Good. Well, then maybe that's a positive impact we're having. Agenda item 12 is the draft forward work programme. That's at page 15 of your tabled pack. We're going to ask the clerk to talk through that.
We've got a few items there that are TBC. We expect to pin down department on both bills for the 24th. That looks pretty secure. 1st of October, we're looking at for the June, July and August OFO briefing. We will keep you up to date on the legislative consent motions that we're aware of, but those look like they've been slightly delayed. That's probably us for what we can say. We're still waiting a lot from the department to be confirmed. We'll get much more in next week's forward work programme.
Peter, is that, sorry, Chair, apologies. Is that informal meeting with the Finance Director still on?
So, sorry, yeah, Chair, if I highlight that for next week, we have that just before the committee meeting. So I think we have a full turnout of Finance Directors.
Oh, brilliant.
So all departments, plus obviously Joanne and possibly some of Joanne's colleagues, and our colleague Eileen Regan from the Public Finance Scrutiny is going to come and sit in on that as well. Okay. So we put out more information for that, to members on that, and we'll provide sustenance.
Okay, so members agreed to that to be published on the. Did we have a vague agreement around or a vague intention around another briefing from the minister? Or we're not going to do.
No, we will schedule that one in, Chair. It's probably going to be either around the budget or
know something
else that comes out of it. So it's kind of. I think the Minister had originally anticipated that the UK government would be making some announcement early November, the plan being then that the Executive would agree a budget early December to go out for consultation. With the UK government now saying end of November, that's going to make it really difficult for the Executive to get something decided before Christmas. So our plan would have been to try and get the Minister on before Christmas. So I don't now know where that's going to leave us, but what we might do is provisionally schedule a date and then see just exactly what's
It would be
happening.
very good to have them. I think we'd want the Minister before Christmas. I think that, to talk about not just about the budget stuff, but to get an update on various
Things in general.
bits, including civil service
We do
reform.
that.
But
We do
I think we really should try and get him before Christmas. Okay, so we'll publish that. Members are agreed. Agenda item 13 is any other business. Mr. Brett.
Thank you, Chair. Just one item I wanted to raise, and it was just in relation to the Minister's recent meeting with the Chancellor, whether there had been a readout provided on that. It's now been about 2.5 months since the Minister said in response to you in the Chamber that he had secured £50 million of FTC on Casement Park. And we still have no details in relation to what that FTC conditionality looks like. Is that being provided to the Executive? Is that being provided to the GAA? What are the requirements in that in terms of positions on boards or paying back the loan? So I just thought that given the Minister's self-appointed role in this, he would have had an answer for us by now.
I did raise it in the Chamber yesterday. I think it's fair enough to ask that question, to ask for an update. I think I agree that's something we should raise and ask for a specific update on that, please. Yes, apologies all. One AOB from me is that I need to go back and seek agreement
So it's item 11.1, the item about the newspaper.
Yes, I need to copy the correspondence. It's not anything. It's not hugely material. I just need to get agreement that I will copy the correspondence to the chairperson's liaison group on that, on the viability of advertising. Yeah.
You might not want to do the same with this committee.
Okay.
But that, we forward that to CLG Chair.
Right.
Just Dr. Aiken, do you want to?
No, was it? No,
You're happy enough with that? Okay. So any other business then we need to conclude? Okay. 14 is date, time and place of next meeting. We are here from 2 p.m. in the Senate chamber for our meeting, but there is an informal meeting, meaning it's not obligatory and you don't have to. So we can do it without you, as it were, but obviously it'd be useful for everybody. And there will be lunch provided. I'm going to put the question to the committee is now adjourned. The committee is now adjourned.
Thank you.